The Autobiography of Goethe, Volume 1, by Johann von Goethe, translated by John Oxenford, Section 16. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Autobiography of Goethe, Volume 1, by Johann von Goethe, translated by John Oxenford, Section 16. Every bird has its decoy, and every man is led and misled in a way peculiar to himself. Nature, education, circumstances, and habit kept me apart from all that was rude, and though I often came into contact with the lower classes of people, particularly mechanics, no close connection grew out of it. I had indeed boldness enough to undertake something uncommon and perhaps dangerous, and many times felt disposed to do so, but I was without the handle by which to grasp and hold it. Meanwhile, I was quite unexpectedly involved in an affair which brought me near to a great hazard, and at least for a long time into perplexity and distress. The good terms on which I before stood with the boy whom I have already named Pylades was maintained up to the time of my youth. We indeed saw each other less often, because our parents did not stand on the best footing with each other, but when we did meet, the old raptures of friendship broke out immediately. Once we met in the alleys which offer a very agreeable walk between the outer and inner gate of St. Gallus. We had scarcely returned greetings when he said to me, "I have hold of the same opinion as ever about your verses. Those which you recently communicated to me I read aloud to some pleasant companions, and not one of them will believe that you have made them." "Let it pass," I answered. "We will make and enjoy them, and others may think and say of them what they please." "There comes the unbeliever now," added my friend. "We will not speak of it," I replied. "What is the use of it? One cannot convert them." "By no means," said my friend. "I cannot let the affair pass off in this way." After a short, insignificant conversation, my young comrade, who was but too well disposed towards me, could not suffer the matter to drop, without saying to the other, without some resentment, "Here is my friend who made these pretty verses, for which you will not give him credit." "He will certainly not take it amiss," answered the other, "for we do him an honor when we suppose that more learning is required to make such verses than one of his years can possess." I replied with something indifferent, but my friend continued, "It will not cost much labor to convince you. Give him any theme, and he will make you a poem on the spot." I assented. We were agreed, and the other asked me whether I would venture to compose a pretty love letter in rhyme, which a modest young woman might be supposed to write to a young man, to declare her inclination. "Nothing is easier than that," I answered, "if I only had writing materials." He pulled out his pocket almanac, in which there were a great many blank leaves, and I sat down upon a bench to write. They walked about in the meanwhile, but always kept me in sight. I immediately brought the required situation before my mind, and thought how agreeable it must be if some pretty girl were really attached to me, and would reveal her sentiments to me, either in prose or verse. I therefore began my declaration with delight, and in a little while executed it in a flowing measure between doggerel and madrigal, and with the greatest possible naïveté, and in such a way that the skeptic was overcome with admiration, and my friend with delight. The request of the former to possess the poem I could the less refuse, as it was written in his almanac, and I liked to see the documentary evidence of my capabilities in his hands. He departed with many assurances of admiration and respect, and wished for nothing more than that we should often meet. So we settled soon to go together into the country. Our excursion actually took place, and was joined by several more young people of the same rank. they were men of the middle, or, if you please, of the lower class, who were not wanting in brains, and who, moreover, as they had gone through school, were possessed of various knowledge and a certain degree of culture. In a large, rich city there are many modes of gaining a livelihood. They eked out a livelihood by copying for the lawyers, and by advancing the children of the lower order more than is usual in common schools. With grown-up children who were about to be confirmed, they went through the religious courses. Then again they assisted factors and merchants in some way, and were thus enabled to enjoy themselves frugally in the evenings, and particularly on Sundays and festivals. On the way there, while they highly extolled my love letter, they confessed to me that they had made a very merry use of it, viz., that it had been copied in a feigned hand, and with a few pertinent allusions had been sent to a conceited young man, who was now firmly persuaded that a lady to whom he had paid constant court was excessively enamored of him, and sought an opportunity for closer acquaintance. They at the same time told me in confidence that he desired nothing more now than to be able to answer her in verse, but that neither he nor they were skilful enough, so that they earnestly solicited me to compose the much desired reply. Mystifications are and will continue to be an amusement for idle people, whether more or less ingenious. A venial wickedness, a self-complacent malice, is an enjoyment for those who have neither resources in themselves nor a wholesome external activity. No age is quite exempt from such pruriences. We had often tricked each other in our childish years. Many sports turn upon mystification and trick. The present jest did not seem to me to go farther. I gave my consent. They imparted to me many particulars which the letter ought to contain, and we brought it home already finished. A little while afterwards I was urgently invited through my friends to take part in one of the evening feasts of that society. The lover, he said, was willing to bear the expense on this occasion, and desired expressly to thank the friend who had shown himself so excellent a poetical secretary. We came together late enough. The meal was most frugal, the wine drinkable, while as for the conversation, it turned almost entirely on jokes upon the young man, who was present, and certainly not very bright, and who, after repeated readings of the letter, almost believed that he had written it himself. My natural good nature would not allow me to take much pleasure in such a malicious deception, and the repetition of the same subject soon disgusted me. I should certainly have passed a tedious evening if an unexpected apparition did not revive me. On our arrival we found the table already neatly and orderly set, and sufficient wine served on it. We sat down and remained alone, without requiring further service. As there was, however, a scarcity of wine at last, one of them called for the maid. But instead of the maid, there came in a girl of uncommon, and, when one saw her with all around her, of incredible beauty. "What do you desire?" she asked, after having cordially wished us a good evening. "The maid is ill in bed. Can I serve you?" "The wine is out," said one. "If you would fetch us a few bottles, it would be very kind." "Do it, Gretchen," said another. *The diminutive of Margaret. Translator. "It is but a cat's leap from here." "Why not?" she answered, and taking a few empty bottles from the table, she hastened out. Her form, as seen from behind, was almost more elegant. The little cap sat so neatly upon her little head, which a slender throat united very gracefully to her neck and shoulders. Everything about her seemed choice, and one could survey her whole form the more at ease, as one's attention was no more exclusively attracted by the quiet, honest eyes and lovely mouth. I reproved my comrades for sending the girl out alone at night, but they only laughed at me, and I was soon consoled by her return, as the publican lived only just across the street. "Sit down with us in turn," said one. She did so, but alas, she did not come near me. She drank a glass to our health and speedily departed, advising us not to stay very long together, and not to be noisy, as her mother was just going to bed. It was not, however, her own mother, but the mother of our hosts. The form of that girl followed me from that moment on every path. It was the first durable impression which a female being had made upon me, and as I could find no pretext to see her at home, and would not seek one, I went to church for love of her, and had soon traced out where she sat. Thus, during the long Protestant service, I gazed my fill at her. When the congregation left the church, I did not venture to accost her, much less to accompany her, and was perfectly delighted if she seemed to have remarked me, and to have returned my greeting with a nod. Yet I was not long denied the happiness of approaching her. They had persuaded the lover, whose poetical secretary I had been, that the letter written in his name had been actually dispatched to the lady, and had strained to the utmost his expectations that an answer must soon come. This also I was to write, and the waggish company entreated me earnestly, through Pylades, to exert all my wit and employ all my art, in order that this piece might be quite elegant and perfect. In the hope of again seeing my beauty, I immediately set to work, and thought of everything that would be in the highest degree pleasing if Gretchen were to write it to me. I thought I had composed everything so completely according to her form, her nature, her manner, and her mind, that I could not refrain from wishing that it were so in reality, and lost myself in rapture at the mere thought that something similar could be sent from her to me. Thus I mystified myself, while I intended to impose upon another, and much joy and much trouble was yet to arise out of the affair. When I was once more summoned, I had finished, promised to come, and did not fail at the appointed hour. There was only one of the young people at home. Gretchen sat at the window spinning. The mother was going to and fro. The young man desired that I should read it over to him. I did so, and read, not without emotion, as I glanced over the paper at the beautiful girl. And when I fancied that I remarked a certain uneasiness in her deportment, and a gentle flush on her cheeks, I uttered better, and with more animation, that which I wished to hear from herself. The lover, who had often interrupted me with commendations, at last entreated me to make some alterations. These affected some passages which indeed were rather suited to the condition of Gretchen than to that of the lady, who was of a good family, wealthy, and known and respected in the city. After the young man had designated the desired changes, and had brought me an inkstand, but had taken leave for a short time on account of some business, I remained sitting on the bench against the wall behind the large table, and essayed the alterations that were to be made on the large slate, which almost covered the whole table, with a pencil that always lay in the window, because upon this slate reckonings were often made, and various memoranda noted down, and those coming in or going out even communicated with each other. I had for a while written different things and rubbed them out again, when I exclaimed impatiently, "It will not do." "So much the better," said the dear girl in a grave tone. "I wished that it might not do. You should not meddle in such matters." She arose from the distaff and stepped towards the table, gave me a severe lecture, and with a great deal of good sense and kindliness. "The thing seems an innocent jest. It is a jest, but it is not innocent. I have already lived to see several cases in which our young people, for the sake of such mere mischief, have brought themselves into great difficulty." "But what shall I do?" I asked. "The letter is written, and they rely upon me to alter it." "Trust me," she replied, "and do not alter it. Nay, take it back, put it in your pocket, go away, and try to make the matter straight through your friend. I will also put in a word, for look you, though I am a poor girl, and dependent upon these relations, who indeed do nothing bad, though they often, for the sake of sport or profit, undertake a good deal that is rash, I have resisted them and would not copy the letter as they requested. They transcribed it in a feigned hand, and, if it is not otherwise, so may they also do with this. And you, a young man of good family, rich, independent, why will you allow yourself to be used as a tool in a business which can certainly bring no good to you, and may possibly bring much that is unpleasant? It made me very happy to hear her speak thus continuously, for generally she introduced but few words into conversation. My liking for her grew incredibly. I was not master of myself, and replied, "I am not so independent as you suppose, and of what use is wealth to me, when the most precious thing I can desire is wanting?" She had drawn my sketch of the poetic epistles toward her, and read it, half aloud, in a sweet and graceful manner. "This is very pretty," she said, stopping at a sort of naive point, "but it is a pity that it is not destined for a real purpose." "That were indeed very desirable," I cried, "and oh, how happy must he be who receives from a girl he infinitely loves such an assurance of her affection." "There is much required for that," she answered, "and yet many things are possible." "For example," I continued, "if any one who knew, prized, honored, and adored you, laid such a paper before you, what would you do?" I pushed the paper nearer to her, which she had previously pushed back to me. She smiled, reflected for a moment, took the pen, and subscribed her name. I was beside myself with rapture, jumped up, and was going to embrace her. "No kissing," she said, "that is vulgar, but let us love if we can." I had taken up the paper and thrust it into my pocket. "No one shall ever get it," said I. "The affair is closed. You have saved me." "Now complete the salvation," she exclaimed, "and hurry off before the others arrive, and you fall into trouble and embarrassment." I could not tear myself away from her, but she asked me in so kindly a manner, while she took my right hand in both of hers and lovingly pressed it. The tears stood in my eyes. I thought hers looked moist. I pressed my face upon her hands and hastened away. Never in my life had I found myself in such perplexity. The first propensities to love in an uncorrupted youth take altogether a spiritual direction. Nature seems to desire that one sex may by the senses perceive goodness and beauty in the other. And thus to me, by the sight of this girl, by my strong inclination for her, a new world of the beautiful and excellent had arisen. I perused my poetical epistle 100 times, gazed at the signature, kissed it, pressed it to my heart, and rejoiced in this amiable confession. But the more my transports increased, the more did it pain me not to be able to visit her immediately, and to see and converse with her again, for I dreaded the reproofs and importunities of her cousins. The good Pylades, who might have arranged the affair, I could not contrive to meet. The next Sunday, therefore, I set out for Niederrad, where these associates generally used to go, and actually found them there. I was, however, greatly surprised when, instead of behaving in a cross, distant manner, they came up to me with joyful countenances. The youngest particularly was very kind, took me by the hand, and said, "You have been lately playing us a sorry trick, and we were very angry with you, but your absconding and taking away the poetical epistle has suggested a good thought to us, which otherwise might never have occurred. By the way of atonement you may treat us to-day, and you shall learn at the same time the notion we have, which will certainly give you pleasure." This harangue caused me no small embarrassment, for I had about me only money enough to regale myself and a friend, but to treat a whole company, and especially one which did not always stop at the right time, I was by no means prepared. Nay, the proposal astonished me the more, as they had always insisted, in the most honorable manner, that each one should pay only his own share. They smiled at my distress, and the youngest proceeded. Let us first take a seat in the bower, and then you shall learn more." We sat down, and he said, "When you had taken the love letter with you, we talked the whole affair over again, and came to a conclusion that we had gratuitously misused your talent to the vexation of others and our own danger, for the sake of a mere paltry love of mischief, when we could have employed it to the advantage of all of us. See, I have here an order for a wedding poem, as well as for a dirge. The second must be ready immediately, the other can wait a week. Now, if you make these, which is easy for you, you will treat us twice, and we shall long remain your debtors." This proposal pleased me in every respect, for I had already in my childhood looked with a certain envy on the occasional poems. Footnote: that is to say, a poem written for a certain occasion, as a wedding, funeral, etc. The German word is Gelegenheitsgedicht, translator, of which then several circulated every week, and at respectable marriages especially came to light by the dozen, because I thought I could make such things as well, nay, better than others. Now an opportunity was offered me to show myself, and especially to see myself in print. I did not appear disinclined. They acquainted me with the personal particulars and the position of my family. I went somewhat aside, made my plan, and produced some stanzas. However, when I returned to the company and the wine was not spared, the poem began to halt. I could not deliver it that evening. "There is still time till tomorrow evening," they said, "and we will confess to you that the fee which we received for the dirge is enough to get us another pleasant evening tomorrow. Come to us, for it is but fair that Gretchen too should sup with us, as it was she properly who gave us the notion." My joy was unspeakable. On my way home I had only the remaining stanzas in my head, wrote down the whole before I went to sleep, and the next morning made a very neat, fair copy. The day seemed infinitely long to me, and scarcely was it dusk when I found myself again in the narrow little dwelling beside the dearest of girls. The young people, with whom in this way I formed a closer and closer connection, were not exactly of a low, but of an ordinary type. Their activity was commendable, and I listened to them with pleasure when they spoke of the manifold ways and means by which one could gain a living. Above all, they loved to tell of people, now very rich, who had begun with nothing. Others to whom they referred had, as poor clerks, rendered themselves indispensable to their employers, and had finally risen to be their sons-in-law, while others had so enlarged and improved a little trade in matches and the like, that they were now prosperous merchants and tradesmen. But above all, to young men who were active on their feet, the trade of agent and factor, and the undertaking of all sorts of commissions and charges for helpless rich men, was, they said, a most profitable means of gaining a livelihood. We all liked to hear this, and each one fancied himself somebody, when he imagined at the moment that there was enough in him not only to get on in the world, but to acquire an extraordinary fortune. But no one seemed to carry on this conversation more earnestly than Pylades, who at last confessed that he had an extraordinary passion for a girl, and was actually engaged to her. The circumstances of his parents would not allow him to go to universities, but he had endeavored to acquire a fine handwriting, a knowledge of accounts, and the modern languages, and would now do his best in hopes of attaining that domestic felicity. His fellows praised him for this. However, they did not approve of a premature engagement, and they added, that while forced to acknowledge him to be a fine, good fellow, they did not consider him active or enterprising enough to do anything extraordinary, while he, in vindication of himself, circumstantially set forth what he thought himself fit for, and how he was going to begin. The others were also incited, and each one began to tell what he was now able to do, doing or carrying on, what he had already accomplished, and what he saw immediately before him. The turn at last came to me. I was to set forth my course of life and prospects, and while I was considering, Pylades said, "I make this one proviso, lest we be at too great a disadvantage, that he does not bring into the account the external advantages of his position. He would rather tell us a tale how he would proceed if at this moment he were thrown entirely upon his own resources, as we are." Gretchen, who till this moment had kept on spinning, rose, and seated herself as usual at the end of the table. We had already emptied some bottles, and I began to relate the hypothetical history of my life in the best humor. "First of all, then, I commend myself to you," said I, "that you may continue the custom you have begun to bestow on me. If you gradually procure me the profit of all the occasional poems, and we do not consume them in mere feasting, I shall soon come to something. But then you must not take it ill if I dabble also in your handicraft." Upon this I told them what I had observed in their occupations, and for which I held myself fit at any rate. Each one had previously rated his services in money, and I asked them to assist me also in completing my establishment. Gretchen had listened to all hitherto very attentively, and that in a position which well suited her, when she chose to hear or to speak. With both hands she clasped her folded arms, and rested them on the edge of the table. Thus she could sit a long while without moving anything but her head, which was never done without some occasion or meaning. She had several times put in a word and helped us on over this and that, when we halted in our projects, and then again still and quiet as usual. I kept her in my eye, and it may readily be supposed that I had not devised and uttered my plan without reference to her. My passion for her gave to what I said such an air of truth and possibility, that for a moment I deceived myself, imagined myself as lonely and helpless as my story supposed, and felt extremely happy in the prospect of possessing her. Pylades had closed his confession with marriage, and the question arose among the rest of us whether our plans went as far as that. "I have not the least doubt on that score," said I, "for properly a wife is necessary to every one of us in order to preserve at home and enable us to enjoy as a whole what we rake together abroad in such an odd way." I then made a sketch of a wife, such as I wished, and it must have turned out strangely if she had not been a perfect counterpart of Gretchen. The dirge was consumed. The epithalamium now stood beneficially at hand. I overcame all fear and care, and contrived, as I had many acquaintances, to conceal my actual evening entertainments from my family. To see and to be near the dear girl was soon an indispensable condition of my being. The friends had grown just as accustomed to me as we were always daily together, as if it could not be otherwise. Pylades had in the meantime introduced his fair one into the house, and this pair passed many an evening with us. They, as bride and bridegroom, though very still much in the bud, did not conceal their tenderness. Gretchen's deportment toward me was only suited to keep me at a distance. She gave her hand to no one, not even to me. She allowed no touch, yet she many times seated herself near me, particularly when I wrote or read aloud, and then, laying her arm familiarly upon my shoulder, she looked over the book or paper. If, however, I ventured to take on a similar liberty with her, she withdrew, and did not return very soon. This position she often repeated, and indeed all her attitudes and motions were very uniform, but always equally becoming, beautiful, and charming. But such a familiarity I never saw her practice towards anybody else. One of the most innocent, and at the same time amusing, parties of pleasure in which I engaged with different companies of young people was this, that we seated ourselves in the Hochst market ship, observed the strange passengers packing away in it, and bantered and teased, now this one, now that, as pleasure and caprice prompted. At Hochst we got out at the time when the market boat from Mentz arrived. At the hotel there was a well-spread table, where the better sort of travellers, coming and going, ate with each other, and then proceeded each on his way, as both ships returned. Every time, after dining, we sailed up to Frankfurt, having, with a very large company, made the cheapest water excursion that was possible. Once I had undertaken this journey with Gretchen's cousins, when a young man joined us at table in Hochst, who might be a little older than we were. They knew him, and he got himself introduced to me. He had something very pleasing in his manner, though he was not otherwise distinguished. Coming from Mentz, he now went back with us to Frankfurt, and conversed with me of everything that related to the internal arrangements of the city, and the public offices and places, on which he seemed to me to be very well informed. When we separated, he bade me farewell, and added that he wished I might think well of him, as he hoped on occasion to avail himself of my recommendation. I did not know what he meant by this, but the cousins enlightened me some days after. They spoke well of him, and asked me to intercede with my grandfather, as a moderate appointment was just now vacant, which his friend would like to obtain. I at first wished to be excused, as I had never meddled in such affairs, but they went on urging me until I resolved to do it. I had already many times remarked that in these grants of offices, which unfortunately were regarded as matters of favor, the mediation of my grandmother or an aunt had not been without effect. I was now so advanced as to arrogate some influence to myself. For that reason, to gratify my friends, who declared themselves under every sort of obligation for such a kindness, I overcame the timidity of a grandchild, and undertook to deliver a written application that was handed in to me. One Sunday after dinner, while my grandfather was busy in his garden, all the more because autumn was approaching, and I tried to assist him on every side, I came forward with my request and the petition, after some hesitation. He looked at it, and asked me whether I knew the young man. I told him in general terms what was to be said, and he let the matter rest there. If he has merit, and moreover good testimonials, I will favor him for your sake and his own. He said no more, and for a long while I heard nothing of the matter. Section 17.